Geralt of Rivia lived by a rule no one ever taught him. Never let anything become yours. Not a home, not a name that mattered, not a person he couldn't bury and walk away from. A witcher who owns nothing has nothing to lose. And a man with 100 enemies and a life that stretches across generations can't afford to love the things he's going to outlive. So he doesn't. He keeps moving, he buries what he has to, and he walks on. We watched him break the Witcher's rule, neutrality, again and again. But this rule, the quiet one, his own, he never broke at all. Until a law older than the Witchers themselves handed him a child. One he hadn't asked for, didn't want, and couldn't refuse. A child that was simply, by that law, owed to him. For a long time, he acted as though distance might be enough, as though the debt could go unanswered, and a man could simply keep walking the way he always had. This is the story of the one time that wasn't enough. The one time Geralt tried to hold to the quiet rule he'd lived by all his life, and found he couldn't. Last time, we talked about the law of surprise, that old custom where a man who saves another's life can claim a strange kind of payment. Give me that which you already have but do not yet know. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale, and most of the time it amounts to nothing. A litter of pups, a harvest, a coin in someone's pocket they'd forgotten about. But destiny doesn't deal in nothing. Geralt saved a man's life, and when the time came to name his price, he spoke the old words. Almost as a reflex, almost as a joke. And the thing he turned out to be owed was a girl, born into that man's house that nobody yet knew was coming. By the oldest law on the continent, she was his. Not his to raise, not his to love. His the way a debt is yours, whether you want it or not. And this was no ordinary child. She was a princess, the heir to one of the old kingdoms of the continent, born into a royal house with a throne, high walls, and a queen for a grandmother. A girl the world already had plans for, long before a witcher's debt entered the picture. Here is what should have meant nothing to a witcher, but didn't. The trial of the grasses had closed one door in Geralt forever. He could never father a child of his own. We covered that last time. So there's a cruel kind of symmetry in what happened. The one man on the continent who could never be a father was handed a daughter. Through a riddle and a debt, he'd spoken without thinking. Most witchers would have seen that as a problem to be solved. And for a while, so did Geralt. So he did what had kept him alive all his life. He walked away. And from where he stood, it made sense. A child belongs in a warm hall with a family. People who can keep her safe, not on the path, trailing behind a mutant with 2 swords and more enemies than friends. Not out in the cold with a man who was built to feel as little as possible. So Geralt told himself the kindest lie he ever told. She's better off without me. He left her where she was, behind high walls, in a city that had stood for generations and looked like it always would. The debt could wait. Destiny could be argued with. A witcher had no business raising a little girl, and every reason he gave himself was true. But every one of those true reasons was also doing something else. It was keeping her at arm's length. It was making sure he never quite became hers, and she never quite became his. There's the contradiction again, the same one from last time. The man who could never stop getting involved in other people's lives found the one person he was actually bound to and tried to stay away. Because getting involved this time didn't mean a contract he could finish and leave behind a town by morning. It meant a child, and it meant forever. And some part of him understood that the moment he let her be his, the quiet rule that had kept him alive could no longer hold. So he kept his distance, and he told himself she was safe. But the world doesn't wait for a witcher to make up his mind. While Geralt kept his distance, the continent was shifting under everyone's feet. In the south, an empire was on the move, Nilfgaard, a black armored army that never once asked which village it was burning on its way north, and those safe walls he'd left her behind. The throne, the hall, the family he'd decided could protect her better than he ever could. They were exactly the kind of thing an empire rolls over and forgets. This is the cruelty buried in the lie he'd told himself. He thought distance was protection. He thought stone walls and a royal court were safer than the road at his side. He was wrong, and the world was about to prove it, because the danger was never on the path with Geralt. It was marching straight toward the one place he'd decided to leave her. And a man who had spent his whole life arriving a moment too late to save the people he cared about was about to do it one more time, this time with the one who mattered most. And then the walls came down. The city he'd trusted to keep her safe burned. The empire came north, and a kingdom that had stood for generations was gone in a matter of days. The throne, the hall, the family, all of it turned to ash. And the child who had always, by the oldest law, been his, was out there somewhere in that burning world, alone, with nothing left to hide behind. This is the moment the lie finally died, because Geralt understood at last the thing he'd been running from. Distance had never been protection. It had only ever been him keeping the rule. He'd told himself she was better off without him, and the world had answered by taking away every other place she could possibly be safe. No court left, no family left, no one coming for her at all, except the one man bound to her by a law he'd once spoken almost as a joke. So the White Wolf, the man built to belong to no one, who owned nothing and loved nothing he couldn't bury and leave behind, did the only thing left in him. He stopped walking away. The older rule, the quiet one, the one he'd held to all his life, he broke it for her. He went looking for the child that was his, not because of a debt, and not because destiny told him to, but because somewhere in all those years of careful distance, without ever deciding to, he'd let her become the one thing he had never allowed himself to have, someone to come home to. This is where the two halves of Geralt finally meet. In part one, he was the witcher who couldn't stay neutral, the man who kept choosing strangers, people he could always walk away from once the job was done. And here, at the end, he found the one person he couldn't walk away from at all. There's a pattern in everything they did to him. They built him to be neutral, and he chose a side. They built him to feel less, and he carried more than any man should. They built him to belong to no one, and then a riddle, a debt, and a burning kingdom gave him a daughter anyway. Every single thing they tried to make him, he refused, stubbornly, to fully become. That is the White Wolf, not a weapon, not a tool, not the hollow thing they tried to build on that table. A man, with somewhere to be from, and now, at last, someone to go back for. I will leave you with the question that sits underneath this whole story. A witcher is built to belong to no one. It keeps him alive, it keeps him free, and it spares him the kind of grief that destroys ordinary men. Geralt threw all of that away for a child he never chose. So where do you stand? Was that the moment he finally became human? The best thing he ever did? Or was it the most dangerous mistake of his life, letting himself love something in a world that takes everything? If you've followed Geralt this far, through the rule he couldn't keep and the bond he couldn't escape, then you're exactly where you should be. Because Geralt's story doesn't end with the child. There's someone else out there, someone the world also tried to remake into a tool, who learned to believe that power was the only thing that could ever keep her safe. A sorceress, with violet eyes and a past as engineered as his own. The next time we walk the path, we meet the woman who became the other half of Geralt's invented family, Yennefer of Vengerberg. That story is coming. Stories end, legends endure. Subscribe and walk the path with us.